I am so excited to be here. It's a privilege to address such a prestigious group. My name is Chris Reel, and I am visiting you all today from the great city of Baltimore, Maryland. Now, back home, I own and operate a company called Baltimore Rent-A-Tour. And I love my job because it allows me to get paid for doing what I'd most likely be doing anyway, and that's telling stories about my favorite place in the whole world. And boy, do we have some great stories in Baltimore. And maybe you know a little bit about our famous waterfront, the Inner Harbor, our renowned seafood. Maybe you've heard of our aquarium. But we're much more than that. We're a city of firsts. We've revolutionized everything from architecture to industry. Baltimore is home to the nation's very first Washington Monument. Maybe you didn't know that. The very first commercial railroad. And I know you've all heard of it because you've all played Monopoly, right? You guys have all heard of the B&O Railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, first commercial railroad in the country. And the nation's first umbrella factory, right? Born in Baltimore, raised around the world. True story. Baltimore is where you can find the birthplace of Babe Ruth and the final resting place of Edgar Allan Poe. And Baltimore's produced great American heroes like Frederick Douglass and Thurgood Marshall. And I could go on and on and on, and believe me, I would if they'd let me. But what I'd like to share with you today is one of my favorite Baltimore stories. And it involves a very important symbol of American identity that I think you're probably familiar with already. So to set the stage, let's go back 200 plus years to the early 19th century. Now at this time, the United States is still a very young country. We're only on our fourth president, President James Madison. And although we had won our independence after the American Revolution, the British refused to treat us as a sovereign nation. They interfered with our free trade. They kidnapped American sailors on the high seas and forced them to serve in the Royal Navy. We said knock it off, they ignored us. So, in 1812, we declare war on them, which was a very bold thing for such a young nation to do. And for the first part of what would become known as the War of 1812, the British were also busy fighting Napoleon in Europe. But after Napoleon's first abdication, the British were free to turn their attention to us. And so ships from the world's mightiest navy sail across the Atlantic Ocean and up the Chesapeake Bay, and they began a campaign of terror, looting and pillaging and burning farms and villages all up and down the coast of the Chesapeake Bay. And then, in August of 1814, the British invade Washington, D.C. Encountering very little resistance, the British confidently march into town and burn the city. So now, the capital is in flames, the government is in complete and total disarray, and the British set their sights on the third largest city in America, the city of Baltimore. Now, throughout the war, ships sailing from Baltimore had been wreaking havoc on the British merchant fleet, disrupting trade and driving up insurance rates. The captains of these privately owned vessels were issued letters of marque and reprisal by the United States government. The Americans called them privateers. The British had a different name for them. The British called them pirates. And the British considered Baltimore to be nothing but a nest of pirates. It was their stated intention to wipe the city out entirely. They were going to make their way into Baltimore, burn public property, private property alike. It didn't matter. The only thing that stood between the city and total destruction was a star-shaped fort at the tip of the South Baltimore Peninsula called Fort McHenry. Now, the fort is commanded by a young Army officer named George Armistead. And an attack on Baltimore had been anticipated for some time. It was Armistead's job to make sure the fort was prepared. So in addition to supplies, munitions, and soldiers, Armistead decides the fort also needs a powerful symbol. So in 1813, he visits the home of a Baltimore flag maker named Mary Pickersgill. And he asks her to make for him a garrison flag to fly above the fort. But not just any flag. A flag so large, in Armistead's words, that the British will have no difficulty seeing it from a distance. So with the help of her mother, her daughter, two nieces, and an African-American apprentice, Mary crafts an enormous 30-foot high, 42-foot long, 15-star, 15-stripe American flag. The flag is larger than the footprint of Mary's Baltimore home. So she and her team have to finish sewing that flag together on the floor of a nearby brewery. maybe they had ulterior motives, I don't know. But after 6 weeks of work, the flag is delivered to Fort McHenry. And then on September the 13th, 1814, the expected attack begins. British ships on the Patapsco River unleash a furious assault, hurling rockets and bombs and mortars at the fort, while 1,000 men hold their ground inside. The commander of the fort, Armistead, knows the British ships have a range of roughly 2 miles. He also knows the guns of Fort McHenry only have a range of about 1.5 miles. So those British ships can still reach the fort while sitting outside the range of the fort's guns. He wisely orders his men to hold their fire and conserve ammunition. Now, every so often, the British ships will move just a little bit closer to see if anybody's still defending the fort. As soon as they're within range, Armistead orders his men to open fire, forcing those British ships to withdraw. So it goes on like this, back and forth for 25 hours. After 25 hours, the guns fall silent. Now, meanwhile, before the battle had begun, a young lawyer had been asked by President James Madison himself to sail out among the British fleet under a flag of truce and help negotiate the release of an American prisoner of war. Now, the negotiations are successful, and the British agree to release the prisoner, but not until after the battle. So, this young lawyer and his party are forced to watch the entire conflict from the deck of that American diplomatic ship downriver behind the British bomb fleet. And when those guns do finally fall silent, he's very nervous. He knows the battle is over. He doesn't know who won. And there is only one thing that will provide the answer to this vital question: the flag. The flag flying over the fort is the only thing that will indicate the outcome of the battle. So, on the morning of September the 14th, 1814, this young lawyer stands on the deck of that American ship, peering through his telescope in the direction of Fort McHenry, desperately looking for a flag. And as the smoke and the clouds clear that morning, by the dawn's early light, what does he see but an enormous American flag? 30 feet high and 42 feet long, with 15 bright stars and 15 broad stripes, flying proudly over Fort McHenry. Only then, when he sees that flag, does he know for certain the British attack was unsuccessful and Baltimore is safe. He's so relieved, he's so proud, he's so inspired. He begins to write. He writes down the words to a poem that would become known as the Defense of Fort McHenry. That young lawyer's name was Francis Scott Key. And the words he wrote in Baltimore that day would soon be published as the lyrics of a song called the Star-Spangled Banner, which would become the national anthem of the United States in 1931. Born in Baltimore in 1814. And that's just one of the countless stories Baltimore has to offer. We can't wait to share those stories and more with you when you come see us in 2021. I'll take you to Fort McHenry myself, and we could stand on the ramparts looking out over the Patapsco River. I can't tell you how much it means to our city that you chose Baltimore for your conference in 2021. In bringing this event to Baltimore, you become part of our great story, and you're helping us write the next exciting chapter. So, from the bottom of this proud Baltimorean's heart, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.